Pre-colonial education. Prior to the arrival of the British in India, education was normally imparted by religious functionaries. Pathshalas, manned by Pandits and Brahmins, were there to impart elementary education to Hindu students, while tolls were for higher education. There was often no fixed school building. Teaching happened either under a tree or in a temple or in the teacher's house. There was no fixed fee and the entire community supported the teachers or paid their fees. The language of instruction was Sanskrit and education was restricted to only young men of the higher castes. Girls usually did not have access to any education. The subject matter law, religion, astronomy, logic, literature and learning was based on traditional texts. Rote learning was preferred and students were expected to memorize traditional knowledge and ancient scriptures. There were no printed textbooks. For Muslims, maktabs were for elementary education, while madrasas imparted higher education. The language of instruction was usually Persian or Arabic. And once again, it was traditional knowledge that was made available to the students. Instruction began with the child writing the letters of the alphabet in sand. When his fingers were well trained, he began writing on a wooden slate smeared with rice paste and pulverized charcoal. Another variety of slate was made from cloth stiffened with rice water and covered with charcoal and several gums. A pencil made of white clay was used to write on these slates. The writing could be wiped off with a wet cloth. These were inexpensive materials made locally by the pupil's parents or neighbors or older playmates. After learning the letters, the pupil proceeded to learn consonants, vowel signs, the names of birds, trees, etc. and then began arithmetic, which starting from the counting of numbers went up to fractions, measures of capacity, area, weight and so on. Overall, it seems that there was a system of community-based elementary education system across India before the colonial period. Education in colonial period. The English East India Company did not take any interest in the education of Indians for the first 60 years of its stay in India. Initially, the focus of some of the British officers and scholars was on learning about the rich Indian literature, Sanskrit and Persian. Such officers were prompted by a desire to know the customs and habits of the people they were increasingly coming into contact with. During the course of their studies, many commented on the close similarity between Sanskrit and other European languages and the rich literary output of ancient India. Governor-General Warren Hastings himself encouraged this trend and it was given strong support by a young judge of the Supreme Court, Sir William Jones. Sir William was a linguist and took a keen interest in the study of Oriental languages. He studied Sanskrit language, grammar and poetry and Indian texts on law, philosophy, religion, etc. Warren Hastings established the Calcutta Madrasa in 1781 for the teaching and study of Muslim law and related subjects in Persian and Arabic, while William Jones set up the Asiatic Society of India in 1784 in Calcutta and started a journal called Asiatic Researches. These became the rallying point of all those who cultivated Oriental languages, cultures and texts. This group of people was collectively known as the Orientalists. They were sentimentally attached to the Indian classical languages and culture and left the traditional system of education almost untouched. There were others like William Jones who shared his passion and interest in Oriental culture. Mention must be made of H.T. Colebrook, who wrote on the Vedas and compiled a book on Sanskrit grammar, and Nathaniel Halhed, who translated the Manusmriti as the code of Hindu laws and also prepared a manual on Bengali grammar. They too believed that the study of ancient Indian texts was to be encouraged and other subjects that Indians were familiar with. In 1791, a college was set up in Benares to study Sanskrit texts by Jonathan Duncan. In 1792, the Delhi Anglo-Oriental College was set up in Delhi as well. Overall, the purpose of the Orientalists was to learn Indian languages and culture and thus better understand the customs and practices of the local people and be good rulers. They also encouraged education based on learning of Indian classical languages, laws, customs, etc. They felt that government should be seen to be sympathetic towards the locals and give them the type of education that they wanted. In 1813, the company passed the Charter Act. Under this act, the British Parliament allowed licensed Christian missionaries to come to India to introduce useful knowledge and religious and moral improvements. The Act directed the East India Company to set aside from Indian revenues a sum of 1 lakh rupees for the revival and improvement of literature and encouragement of learned natives and for the introduction and promotion of the knowledge of sciences. The money lay untouched till 1823 as there were no guidelines on how to use this money. The government continued to encourage traditional learning and did not interfere with education. There was a rising group of people in official circles who had a different outlook on India and hence promoted a different type of education. This group was of the view that Indians were essentially uncivilized and that Britain was on a civilizing and moral mission in India. They argued that it was the duty of the British to bring in good governance into India through various means. They strongly supported the use of English as a medium of instruction in Western rational curricula as the basis of education in India. This group came to be known as the Anglicists and included people such as Lord Thomas Macaulay. They were much encouraged by the writings of James Mill, who propagated the view that education was not meant to please the Indians and win a place in their hearts, but to impart knowledge of practical and useful things and in a sense civilize the natives. Soon many British officials began to criticize the Orientalist vision of education. There was a heated debate on the utilization of the funds set aside by the Charter of 1813. The Orientalist group, led by H. H. Wilson, wanted the promotion of traditional Indian learning and the propagation of a bit of Western science using the vernacular languages. The group known as the Anglicists, led by Macaulay, did not like this vision. According to them, the knowledge of the East was full of errors and unscientific thoughts. So, they argued that the British government should not spend on the study of Arabic and Sanskrit language and literature. They believed that India was an uncivilized country and needed to be civilized. They felt that the knowledge of English would allow the Indians to read some of the finest literature that the world had produced and get the benefit of the development in Western science and philosophy. The Anglicists emphasized the promotion of Western learning using English as the medium of instruction. It was in this context that Macaulay wrote his famous Minutes emphasizing the need for English medium education and Western education. He was categorical that English as the medium of instruction and Western knowledge was far superior. Based on the Minutes, Lord William Bentinck, then Governor-General of India, passed the English Education Act in 1835. The two main provisions of the Act were to make English the medium of instruction for higher education, to stop the promotion of Oriental institutions of learning like the Calcutta Madrasa and Benares Sanskrit College. With this act, the limited funds were spent on setting up higher institutions of education where the medium of instruction would be English. The government opened high schools and colleges instead of elementary schools. In 1844, another act was passed which made English the official language. It announced that only those Indians who had knowledge of English would get government jobs. Practical and moral education. The proposed benefits of English education were brought out more clearly and better elucidated in 1854 in the Words Dispatch. This was a long note on education in India prepared by Sir Charles Wood, who was the president of the Board of Control of the East India Company. As the president, Wood in 1854 sent a dispatch to Lord Dalhousie, the then Governor-General of India, as dispatch number 49 of 19th July 1854. for creating a properly articulated system of education from the primary school to the university. The renewal of the company's charter in 1853 provided the occasion for the dispatch. The Worth Dispatch highlighted two practical benefits of promoting education in India. A. Education was expected to promote an economic understanding, whereby Indians would understand the benefits of British rule and thereby adopt a Western lifestyle and clothes, providing a market for English goods in India. And B. Through the moral qualities promoted by the education so imparted, Indians would attain higher levels of morality and become more honest and trustworthy. To achieve these aims, the Woods Dispatch made the following recommendations. The dispatch drew special attention of the government to the importance of placing the means of acquiring useful and practical knowledge within reach of the great mass of the people. It declared that the aim of education in India was to impart Western education, and the medium of instruction for higher education would be English. However, it also emphasized the importance of vernacular languages. It proposed to set up vernacular schools in villages at the lowest stage, followed by Anglo-vernacular high schools and affiliated colleges at the district level. It proposed the formation of a Department of Public Instruction under the change of a director in each province. Universities in the model of London University were proposed to be set up in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. It mentioned the need for vocational training and setting up of technical training institutes, including teachers' training institutes. Woods Education Dispatch formed the basis of the education policy of the British government in India since 1854. It came to be called the Magna Carta of modern education in India. It was needed a landmark in the history of education and presented a comprehensive plan for the later development of the educational system in the subcontinent. Colonial Education after Woods Dispatch. After the Woods Dispatch, colonial education in India continued to be directed by several other commissions. Let us take a quick look at some of them. Hunter Commission, 1882-83. Set up under the chairmanship of Sir William W. Hunter, its main recommendation was to take special care for the extension of primary education in vernacular India. This was to be managed by local government bodies. The committee came up with 200 other recommendations, and the overall impact of the commission was increase in number of students in secondary schools and colleges. The Indian Universities Act 1904. The Act increased government control over universities and the control of universities over private colleges. Education Policy 1913. In 1906, the princely state of Baroda introduced compulsory primary education within its territories. There was much pressure on the government of India to do the same. However, the government could only agree in principle to remove illiteracy. The Sadler University Commission 1917-19. This recommended a 12-year school course before entering the university and setting up of intermediate colleges. In 1929, there was the Hartog Committee report emphasizing the quality of education rather than quantity, and finally, in 1944-49, the Radhakrishnan Committee was set up under Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, who later served as the President of India, to suggest improvements in higher education. Traditional versus modern education systems. Let us now compare the traditional and modern systems of education. The traditional system of education had the following characteristics. A traditional school did not have any of the features that you see in schools nowadays. There were no classrooms, no textbooks, no roll call, not even school buildings. Schools were very often organized around one teacher. The traditional schools were based on the requirements of the local people and run by them. In a sense, they only taught you as much as you needed to learn. They were very affordable, and it was not always necessary to pay fee in cash. They were based in the local life cycles. Thus, the school would not be held during harvest. This suited the rural children. Learning was in local languages and traditional knowledge was imparted. Till the middle of the 19th century, the colonial rulers were mostly concerned with higher education, but after the Words Dispatch, they began to concentrate on vernacular education as well. Let us take a look at some of the changes they were able to bring about in the realm of education in India. Government appointed Pandits in charge of 4 to 5 schools. It was their job to go around the schools and make sure that the teaching was of a certain standard and that classes were taken as per a timetable. They submitted periodic reports to the government. There was thus the beginning of state supervision of education. Education no longer remained a local or regional affair. The format of teaching changed completely. Teaching was done through textbooks. Students were expected to attend schools regularly, pay fixed fee monthly, and appear for exams to test their ability. School buildings came up and a new type of discipline was imposed. The schools which followed these rules were supported and funded by the government. State funding of education started. Independent pathshalas lost favor. Because of the year-round teaching cycle, many rural families found it difficult to send their children to school. On the positive side, girls were encouraged to attend school. Let us now consider the overall impact of colonial education policies on education in India. The growth of education was not uniform at all levels. More attention was paid to the expansion of high schools and colleges. Pathshalas which accepted the new rules were supported by government grants. Those who were unwilling to work within the new system received no government grants. The new educational system neglected education of the masses. Because education was more expensive, only the rich and urban people could afford it. The new system demanded regular attendance in the schools even during the harvest season. Otherwise, students were not allowed to continue in school. English medium education neglected the study of Indian literature, history, law and philosophy. Scientific and technical education for Indians was also neglected. Educational institutions came to be set up mainly in urban areas, and there was little effort made to educate girls. English education brought the Indians into contact with rational and scientific ideas and with the developments in science and technology. Indians became familiar with the writings of great thinkers which inspired the Indian national movement. English that emerged as the common language among educated Indians helped to spread new ideas among common people living in different parts of India and created bonds of unity among them. National education. From the early 19th century, many thinkers from different parts of India began to feel that Western education would help modernize India. They urged the British to open more schools, colleges and universities and spend more money on education. This trend is best exemplified in Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who forcefully articulated the benefits of Western education. Yet, there were some Indians like Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore who did not like the British educational system. They began to question British education policy as the nationalist movement gathered momentum, particularly after the partition of Bengal and the beginning of Swadeshi and boycott movements. Many other Indians also began to not only question the educational policies of the British government, but also advocated their boycott. Moreover, during the anti-partition movement, students had been very active. This appeared to have angered the British authorities, and they expelled many students from their schools and colleges. Not only were the students fined and expelled, but many teachers were also forced to resign when they refused to fine or punish the students as asked by the government. This attitude of the British government threatened the future of thousands of students. Thus, many leading intellectuals and nationalist political leaders of Bengal met to decide on a future course of action. In a conference held on 10 November 1905, they decided to establish a National Council of Education. This was to be given the task of organizing a system of education on national lines, which would also be in nationalist hands. Within no time, a huge amount was collected and the National Council of Education was set up. A number of schools and colleges were also founded. On 1st June 1906, the council was registered, and on the 11th March 1922, the foundation stone of Sri Aurobindo Bhavan at the present Jadavpur University campus was laid. This is now one of the finest universities in India. Rabindranath Tagore and Shanti Niketan. Rabindranath's ideas on education were shaped by his experiences of his school days when he hated going to school. School to him was like a jail. It followed very rigid rules, and he was not free to do whatever he wished. He had always dreamt of educational institutions where children would be free and happy, would have the freedom to learn from the environment and explore his or her own thoughts. He also felt that students had to be kept away from all the opulence and luxuries of European life, nor should they be allowed to go infatuated with these. He wanted to make students aware of the richness of Indian traditions. To fulfill his dream, he chose to set up a school out in the open about 100 km from Calcutta and gave it the name Shanti Niketan, Adobe of Peace. Here, open-air education, as opposed to being crammed within four walls, became a reality. At Shanti Niketan, the emphasis was on self-motivation and fostering intellectual curiosity among the children, rather than on competitive excellence. The school was unusual in many ways. Classes, except those requiring a laboratory, were held outdoors whenever the weather permitted. Class discussions moved on from Indian traditional literature to contemporary as well as classical Western thought, and then to the culture of China or Japan or just about anywhere else. What started off as a school ultimately became the Vishwabharati University at Shanti Niketan. Mahatma Gandhi and Nai Talim. Mahatma Gandhi argued that Western education only focused on reading and writing. Learning to read and write was simply literacy, and literacy was not education. He said education meant all-round development in children, in men and women, not just the ability to read and write. Education ought to develop a person's body, mind and soul. Therefore, he suggested that craft, art, technical skill, literacy and education should all be integrated into one scheme. He called this Nai Talim, a basic education program that would blend and teach all kinds of skills and cover the education of an individual from the time of conception to the moment of death. Mahatma Gandhi criticized Western education as it created a sense of inferiority in the minds of Indians and made them dependent on the British. So he suggested that all children should begin their education by learning a craft. He also emphasized that these handicrafts should be taught not mechanically, as was done under the British education system, but scientifically. He wanted the new Indian schools to be self-supportive. He argued that Indians simply could not afford to provide education to all children unless schools could generate resources from within. He pointed out that the more financially independent the schools, the more politically independent they would be. He therefore suggested the introduction of productive handicrafts such as spinning, weaving, leatherwork, pottery, metalwork, etc. in schools' curriculum. His views on education were a combination of Swaraj and Swadeshi. He wanted an education that could help Indians recover their sense of dignity and self-respect and end the teachers' subservience to prescribed textbooks and curriculum. He also wanted to free teachers from external interference. Thus, Gandhiji's aimed at developing a holistic system of education for an individual's mind, body and soul that would enhance the self-respect of India and at the same time emphasize vocational learning schools following the Nai Talim scheme of Gandhiji were started. From the middle of the 19th century, colonial administration began to directly intervene in the education of Indians. The focus was on Western education, with English as the medium of instruction. Later on there was some focus on vernacular as the medium of education, but the curricula remained Western. This system of education replaced the traditional system of education in India, which was based on local needs and local methods. The modern education system was based on the understanding of providing the Indians with practical education, influencing them to understand British system. and ways of life and generally prepare them for modern vocations. Our modern education system has its foundation in the colonial system of education that developed in the 19th and 20th centuries under the colonial rule. From early 20th century, some nationalist leaders grew dissatisfied with modern education since it focused only on literacy and not on overall education of a person. A national system of education was thus thought about by leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore as an alternative. Shantiniketan was based on the principles of national education. However, this system of education never really became the mainstream in India.